So hello again. Thank you all so much for being here to talk about congregations and affordable housing with the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy. I'd like to turn the meeting over now to Shelley Murphy, who is, of course, the Executive Director of Wesley Housing, I think.
CEO, Executive
CEO,
Director.
even cooler.
Yeah. Thanks, Sheila. And Sheila had sent out an agenda, so I'm going to sort of tick through that, but I'm going to do it fairly quickly because I want the bulk of this first portion of the time to be Steve and Julie's opportunity to share what they've learned as they've walked through the process with us of developing their church property for affordable housing. I think one of the things to think about is there's always the idea that says, well, if we have land, what do we want to use it for? And it's not always, affordable housing is not always the right answer. So some congregations choose to use it for school or public space or recreational space. And there's just a lot of things to think through for the congregation in terms of what you're called to do. Where is your mission heart? The other thing is, how much land do you have? Is it enough land? How is it zoned? How dense is the housing or the buildings around you? That all determines whether or not it might make sense for someone to come in and work with you to develop affordable housing or any type of housing on that property. What I would say is no matter how long you think it's going to take, double it, because it is a long process. The first part of that process really is your discernment process. What is it that you want to do? How do you want to approach it? Then, because in most cases, churches don't have the expertise to just go out and develop it themselves, and they may not want to own and operate it in the long term after it's done, you have to find a partner. So there's a whole process involved with finding the right partner who will develop the property in partnership with you. And it's like getting married because you're going to be neighbors utilizing this property, assuming that the church stays in place. Sometimes they do, sometimes it's a church sale and the congregation moves or dissolves. But for most of our partnerships, the church is a part of it and a valued partner to what we're doing. So it's really important to make sure that you've got that right fit where you feel like you can move forward together in a positive way to achieve the goal. Once you've selected a development partner, then you start the whole process of what's the design look like? You have to get to a formal memorandum of understanding and all these legal documents that make sure that
seats fill up. I'm going to go way down the hall.
That the church's interests are cared for, even while the developer is making sure that there is an opportunity that makes economic sense to develop the housing. But I know when we come into a property or to a project with the church, it's very important that the church is getting out of it what the church needs. That's part of having that good partnership in marriage. And that takes a while. And then once all that is done, then you start working together on developing the property, which means the whole public approval process. It may mean a comprehensive plan amendment. It'll certainly mean zoning or special exceptions and all these technical terms that you don't have to know now, but you'll certainly learn them going through the process, as Julie and Steve know. And the churches play a really important role in this because developing church property is a little bit different than developing other commercial or institutional property. All your neighbors think they own the property. All your neighbors think they get a vote in terms of what you do and how you approach this. And that's even more so than, for instance, when we're developing other land that we may have acquired in other ways. So the role that the church plays and the role that the faith leader plays is really important in terms of working with the community to make sure they understand the importance of this to the congregation. I think with that, I want to turn it over to Pastor Juli to talk a little bit about what the process was for Fairlington Presbyterian as we've reached almost completion with the waypoint.
Okay, great. Thanks, Shelley. So I'd like to start with showing you just a short video that our architect actually put together early on when we started thinking about how to communicate what we were doing to others. And so I'd like to show that. And then Sheila, if I can, after the video, I'll share my screen just so you can see sort of what the waypoint at Fairlington looks like. And then I'll talk a little bit about how it came to be. When our church was built over 70 years ago, we wanted plenty of room for expansion. So we built a huge front lawn and a huge parking lot. And when I arrived 7 years ago at the church, we were looking at spending $80,000 to repave a parking lot that we never even used at half its capacity.
You know, faith institutions are just like a lot of other organizations are using land less than they used to. And so how they're looking at land is a lot differently, particularly in an urban area. You know, one of our major challenges in the city is housing affordability, is making sure that we have enough places for folks of low and moderate incomes to live. And so
when Fairlington Presbyterian Church, you know, invited us to take a look at their site and see if there's a way that we can incorporate some affordable housing here, we jumped on the opportunity. It's a great site. It's a beautiful church.
In place of the current parking lot, there will be 81 new affordable multifamily rental units in a vibrant, walkable neighborhood. This will be a big step towards prosperity for many families and a great place to live.
For us, it has lifted the lid off of the stigma associated with affordable housing and made us realize that the people that we're already living with and already worshiping with may be our neighbors in this new building.
All right, and I will allow you to screen share in just a second, Julie.
And you're on mute, Julie.
Okay, thank you. Perfect. So let me just show you what our site looks like. So the church over to the left, prior to the development of the site, was on the front half of our 3-acre property. And as you saw in the video, we had 120 parking spaces behind the church, and in front of the church, we had a big front lawn. Also behind the church, we had a playground. So in this new configuration of the site, what you're seeing here is 81 units of affordable housing in a 4-story residential building with underground parking for the residents underneath the residential building. And the new surface parking that you see here, it wraps around all 3 sides of the building. So the 3 sides of the building have surface parking for the church, about 60 spaces. And then you can't see it in this particular image, but we moved our playground to the big front yard in front of the church. So now we have a playground that is more visible and is more of an asset for the community and for our neighbors in front of our building in a more visible location. So when we started talking with Wesley Housing about developing our site, we had a sense that we were sitting on some very valuable real estate that was being underutilized. It wasn't serving the church and it wasn't serving the community. It was just costing the church a lot of money to maintain, and we had a lot of grass to mow. But nobody was really feeling like we were getting much benefit from this property that had been, you know, envisioned and built in the 1940s and 50s. And so our leaders, when we started asking the question, how could we make better use of this property, and how could we take advantage of the value of the property in order to turn some of this into income for the church, we started talking with a variety of developers. And when we received a proposal from Wesley Housing, what really struck us and what people got excited about is the impact that this could have on our neighborhood. You know, this is it's a small parcel of property. 3 acres is not a lot of space, but they came up with a way to utilize the space that would provide housing for 81 families on an underutilized parking lot. And so that was really exciting for us, not only because it was a mission to our community, but also because through the sale of our parking lot, we would receive enough money to be able to really transform our ministry. So we have, at the same time as this building has been being built, we have embarked on a renovation of our existing building, which had not been renovated in 75 years. So we are putting in an elevator and accessible restrooms and a new entryway and new offices, and making much better use of our existing building than we had been able to before. And so it was really a win-win for our congregation. As Shelley mentioned, you know, the process of discernment of coming to this was, it was long, and it was painstaking and at times painful, because as you can imagine, not everybody was on board with this idea. You know, a lot of people, not a lot, but a number of longtime members felt like doing transforming our property in this way was sort of giving up on the dream of the people who founded the church, that we would fill that parking lot and that our parking lot and our sanctuary would be filled every Sunday. And so by sort of trading that opportunity or giving up on that opportunity, they felt like we were giving up on the future of the church. That was a minority, however. The bigger sense of the congregation was that by doing this, we would really transform our congregation into a place that was mission driven, and that rather than worrying so much about all the chronic headaches involved in maintaining an older building, we would have energy to build new relationships with our new neighbors. And that has been how it's played out for us so far. Folks have gotten really excited about all the new relationships that we have the opportunity to build here. And one example of that is 9 of these units are set aside for young adults with developmental disabilities, intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so we're partnering with an organization called Our Stomping Ground that provides programming and supports for that population of folks with autism, you know, various intellectual and developmental disabilities that make it hard for them to live independently, but with appropriate supports, they can be part of this community. And so, you know, that is a population that we're really excited to be able to welcome into our community as a church. And one of the things that the leasing manager for Wesley Housing has told me is that as folks come in, you know, you see exactly where this building is located. It's right next door to the church. And as folks come in to apply to live there, she said many of them have asked, can I be part of the church too? And they see it as a 2-for-1 deal, you know, that I'm getting a place to live and I'm getting a church community. And that's really the way we are seeing it as well, that we're getting the advantage of making better use of our property and the income that provides, but we're also getting new neighbors and expanding our community and expanding our ability to be, you know, a more diverse family of all the children of God. So that's kind of our story in a nutshell, and I'm happy to talk more about that later, but I just want to put that out there and then let the others, have a chance to present, and then I'll be happy to take any questions.
So Steve, First Christian Church of Falls Church is not as far along. We are through the comp plan piece. We're in the midst of the zoning piece and living the dream, as it were. So why don't you talk about First Christian's walk?
Sure. Thanks, Shelley, and thanks, Pastor Juli. Some of our story parallels. I think my congregation, our church, could have had the same architect as your church as we go through this process. I think what I would like to talk about briefly is our process started about over 10 years ago when Fairfax County approached us as a community of faith and said, hey, we would like to be able to partner with faith communities in the county in order to be able to build affordable housing or homeless shelters or do something to partner with faith communities. And so initially, Fairfax County approached us, and we were in conversation for a while about a possible temporary homeless shelter to be built on our property. That did not go over well with the community. And I don't know the whole history because it was before I was there. I've been at the church a little over 4 years. So that was they didn't proceed with that partnership with us, but it got our congregation really engaged in what can we do that is mission-minded and mission-focused, because we know that housing is such a need in the community. And we have a ministry to the homeless on Thursdays, and initially I think that was appealing to have a temporary homeless shelter on our property because we have a ministry toward unsheltered folks to begin with. So that shifted our focus as the county realized it wasn't going to be feasible to build a temporary homeless shelter. So we shifted our focus and did some initial community outreach to kind of get feedback. And we talked about affordable housing, and we landed on affordable senior independent living. So our project is about 95 units, and will be 1- and 2-bedroom apartments in a parcel of land right next to the church. And I want to talk a little bit about the process and some of the challenges and opportunities. So Fairfax County, first of all, if you decide to enter into some kind of process like this, Shelley is correct. It's going to take a lot longer than you think it can. And that's been one of my frustrations and learnings is that if I could lobby the state or county, it would be, you've got to make this process easier because the need is so great. You heard the mayor of Alexandria in the video talk about the need is so great. Fairfax County really, all of our municipalities and counties probably need to do a better job of making this affordable or making it possible. So we as a congregation discerned, we interviewed potential partners. We landed on Wesley Housing and selected them because of their commitment to, well, just because of the culture of who Wesley Housing is, but also a commitment to really try to work with the neighbors behind us. We have lots of trees, and we want to preserve as many trees. And just how can we put this building on our space and make it a beautiful place to live, but also to keep some neighbors engaged and happy with the process. And for us, our congregation, Wesley Housing, has been the perfect fit for that. Communication is really key with the congregation in this process. Because I attend a lot of meetings, I have a land use committee, but because they're working jobs, I attend a lot of meetings. So I've learned about stormwater and parking and all kinds of things that I never imagined as a pastor I would need to know or care to know. So as pastors, if you're out there listening, you will learn a lot. And as the process has gone on, again, I would say that the key players are to have a really good partner, because that's just key in everything. And then the team that they create, the partner creates and brings to the table for the congregation is also key. We were not a lot of congregations have this ability. We had some resources to be able to hire a consultant who worked on our behalf, who walked us through a lot of this process. And that has been invaluable in keeping us as a congregation focused, making sure that our interests are also brought to the table, because it is a partnership. So this did not happen, but let's say Wesley said, we want to build 200 units. And we would have been like, no, and Wesley, you work it out. So again, we had some resources to be able to hire a consultant who specializes in real estate development, who's partnered with churches before. I also want to say a little bit about how crucial community outreach is. And what I've learned from that process is that the community outreach needs to be broad to bring in a lot of different voices, including those who will be living in the residences that will be in the apartments that will be built. We have some neighbors that are behind us who are very vocal, and as Shelley said, they have determined that they've had nothing to do with the church, but now it's their property and they think we should keep it a pretty little green space, because that's just what we should do. And so NIMBYism, not in my backyard, is pretty powerful and surprising to me. Why wouldn't you want affordable housing built? And so I've really had to learn to bite my tongue and articulate the vision and mission of our ministry, and because it can get really, really frustrating on the nitpickiness of neighbors who claim, they'll say, oh, we want this project, we want affordable housing, we know we need affordable housing, just not on this property. And Shelley and the team assure me that our meetings with our neighbors so far has actually been pretty tame. So I'm grateful for that, but it doesn't always feel like it's been that way. Then it's also really important to build a relationship with your, however, for Fairfax County, we're divided into districts and then we have supervisors. So it's really important to build a relationship with the supervisor and to maintain that relationship and to build upon that. One of the wonderful things about our project is we're partnering with a free health clinic called the Colmar Clinic, and they will have 5,000 square feet of dedicated space in the new building. Right now they meet in our basement, but people of lower economic status deserve a place like I can go to see my doctor. They deserve a nice place too. And so in this project, there will be 5,000 square feet dedicated to the Colmar Clinic, which partners again with another need in the community of quality health care. So I'm thrilled about this project. And we did a little community outreach video. And so Sheila, hit it.
Greetings, I'm Steve Moore,
Senior Minister at First Christian Church of Falls Church. I want to share with you an exciting vision and opportunity that we have here at our congregation, and I'm happy to share it with you and our community. Many years ago, Fairfax County approached our congregation desiring to partner with us about what housing might look like in our area. After much discussion and study and some initial community outreach, our congregation discerned that the best use of our property would be to build an affordable, independent senior apartment community. In addition, this community will have room for a health clinic to provide greater health care and access to health care in the Bailey Crossroads corridor. After much discernment, we have partnered with Wesley Housing Corporation, where we will sell the land to Wesley and they will build this project to enhance the community, to bring greater access to healthcare, and to provide affordable housing for senior citizens in our county. I invite your input and feedback as we go throughout this process, and I look forward to getting to know you in the days ahead.
Hi, I'm Shelley Murphy, the CEO of Wesley Housing, and we were honored to be selected as the development partner by First Christian Church of Falls Church. To tell you a little bit about Wesley Housing, our mission is to build up the lives of our most vulnerable community members by creating and operating healthy, supportive, stable, affordable housing communities. And that's what we envision here. Our role as a part of this project is to be the developer of the project. We will then be the long-term owner and operator. We will provide the property management, and we will bring in resident services to help the residents be able to maintain housing for the long term as part of the community. We envision the project to have three parts. The first part is up to 113 apartments that are affordable to low-income seniors. The second part is 5,000 square feet of medical office space, which we see as being an opportunity for the Colmore Clinic to have dedicated space that allows them to expand their mission of providing healthcare to the most vulnerable in the community who don't have insurance or any other healthcare options. And then finally, it will give the church an opportunity to expand their space in a way that meets their mission to serve the community going forward. To do this, it's a two-step approval process with both the local community and Fairfax County. The first step is the permission or the approval to actually use the land for the purposes that I've just described. And then the second phase is what we call zoning, where we come back with detail about what the building will look like, what the traffic will, how that will be handled, parking, stormwater management, keeping a green tree canopy, all those sorts of things that will be designed and approved at a detailed level by both the community and Fairfax County. Right now, we're in the first step, and so we're reaching out to the community to make sure that you've got the ability to participate as we go through this process. Listed on the next page, you will see a website that will include information about the project, and it will be updated going forward. And if you want more information about Wesley Housing, you can find us at wesleyhousing.org. As we move forward, there will also be public meetings scheduled, and we'll make sure that you are aware of the times and locations of these meetings so that you can participate. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. Before I pass it back to Shelley, there were just a couple other things I wanted to say. In addition to our community outreach video, we created some pamphlets with a QR code to link to the video, but we created these in different languages. So we have Arabic, Amharic, Spanish, and English, and I believe there might be another language in there. But again, trying to reach those who reflect what our community is really like, rather than as just one segment of our neighbors, and who are the more vocal ones, because we really want all voices to be heard. The other thing is that our congregation embarked on a visioning process right before I arrived. And so we have what's called a future story. And our story includes how to become a community hub in the Bailey Crossroads, Seven Corners, Colmore area that will involve the residents of the apartment building. How might they mentor young people in our community? We have a community garden. How might they participate in the garden that will allow food to be given away to local food shelters in the community? And just like Pastor Juli's church, we will be able to renovate our building in order to transform this property that has not been renovated since it was built in 1958. I mean, if any of you remember growing up in the bathroom in the little hand crank paper towel things, we still have those. And so how can we transform our building to really be a community hub that involves the residents who will be moving in, because we see them as partners in our future story. Thanks, Shelley, and thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Steve. And yeah, I wanted to emphasize that video, not only the QR code that linked to pamphlets in multiple languages, but the video was translated to 4 or 5 languages. And then the pamphlets were distributed through the local faith communities, because it's the only way we could think of to reach the communities that most need the housing, but who never participate in the public process. So that was a big piece of this, was trying to make sure that they were aware of what was coming to their community and could speak into it. So with that, I know we're running a little long. Sheila, should I pass it straight to Cathy?
Let's do that. And we will have the floor open for questions. I think everyone can stay at least a few more minutes to chat after we finish the presentation. So if you want specific questions, feel free to throw them in the chat or just wait until we are done. Go ahead, Cathy.
Okay, thank you. Again, hello, everybody. My name is Cathy Woodson. I'm with St. Elizabeth's Catholic Church here in the city of Richmond. And our church is a very small congregation. And we've been around, we're going to be celebrating our 100th anniversary next year. So tells you how long we've been around. But in all that time, our property had the church on the corner. Behind the church, there was a school. And then next door to the school was a convent for the sisters that ran the school. Well, in the late 1980s, all of that kind of changed for us. And so the school closed and we merged with another Catholic school. The nuns moved. And so we had property behind the church building that was vacant. The diocese asked us what we wanted to do. And there was another community of organization that was interested in the church property behind us, and actually wanted to purchase it. And in our own discernment process at the parish, we thought, well, okay, what are they going to do with it? And they were interested in housing way back then. And so we affirmed that and thought, well, this is a good mix for us. This is a good chance for us to be a part of something bigger. Well, you've heard from our other presenters how long it takes. Partnerships are important. And just to fast forward, the land is still empty. The diocese has purchased it back from the private owner. The church, our church has been very involved in our own discernment process of, well, we do a food pantry. We also have assistance for people who need rental assistance. And so in all of that outreach in the community and our own discernment of what our call is, not only to one another, but to the wider community, we started wondering, well, what would housing look like? We've lost that vision because we thought somebody else was going to do it. And so we started the venture of looking for a partner. And that is so very important to have a partner in this. We had to build a relationship with the neighborhood to see where they were, how they were feeling about it. And of course, some of our neighbors, like you've heard, they want from other folks, is that they wanted to maintain green space because they now, you know, walk their dogs over in that spot, or they hike down in that spot, and they love the wooded area and they don't want to lose the trees. And some other neighbors were okay with developing housing, but they didn't want dense housing. And so in listening to the neighbors and listening to our church members and really trying to figure out what is it that would work for everyone, those relationships and our elected officials for our area, taking all of that in consideration, we entered the relationship with Commonwealth Catholic Charities for a couple of reasons. We feel that they're a good partner for us, but also they provide a broader range of services to families. And that was really key for our parishioners to support this idea of multifamily housing. So we have been able to look at, through discernment, what it is we think would fit with the neighborhood, what are the amenities that we want to offer. And so we come up with a broad sketch that we talked about with our partner of we want to maintain some green space, we want adequate parking, we want housing that really meets the aesthetics of the neighborhood that we're in. We want to be in community with the housing that's built. So it's 56 units that we're looking at. It's going to be it's affordable housing, multifamily housing. There's going to be a playground. There's going to be a community space, which everybody in our church was excited about, because right now we don't have adequate community space. Again, think of a church building in 1923. It was built then. So we got excited about, oh, this would be wonderful. It also will offer an opportunity to meet needs of folks who are in desperate need of affordable housing. But as we talked about that, one of the things that we've helped do is help our parishioners understand not just the need for housing, but all of what it takes to develop affordable housing. So our church members have learned a lot. We have a small committee that's kind of heading this up with our priest. We are working hand in hand with Commonwealth Catholic Charities. Ours is sort of like a triangle, because we've got to keep the diocese informed, we have to keep our parishioners informed, and we keep the wider community informed of what we're doing. And so that's very important to us, that we don't overstep and leave any of our partners out. Our neighborhood is a partner. They've been appreciative of everything that we've tried to offer. We've had some pushback on some things. Like I said, there's some that want green space. Some are concerned about who's going to live there. And one of the things that we wanted as a church is that we wanted a partner that could provide services. So our partner can provide counseling services, all the social services that are needed for families if they need them. It's not saying everybody will need them, but it's certainly available to them. And there's going to be, like I said, a community space that we have already entered into conversation with. How do we invite the wider community to take advantage of meeting people and having neighborhood meetings in the space? How do we as a church community help support families in a way that they feel wanted when they move in, and they're welcome to anything at the church, all of the services at the church. The other thing is that we've talked a lot about how we keep our church members informed. It is very important, not just the leadership, but everybody sitting in the pew needs to be informed on sort of where we are in the process. This started for us, for where we are now, it started about 2.5 years ago. And we've been very blessed that they've got one leg of funding. And so we seem to be moving a little fast, but also we didn't have to jump through a lot of hoops with the city of Richmond because the property was already zoned for housing. So that had been done by previous owners of the land. So we didn't have to go through that piece. You know, we have answered questions about, well, 56 units is not a lot of housing, but for the piece of property, it fits very well with the neighborhood. It allows us to do some extra things in the design. The initial design is just, everybody who's seen is like, wow, this is exciting. They see, like, you're going to do tree-lined parking spaces. It's going to be, you know, it's not going to be a big parking lot, but it's going to be a loop around parking lot. I'm sure there's a better name for that, Steve, right? I'm sure there's a professional name for a loop around parking lot. But it means that you just, you know, that you'll be able to park front or back of your unit. The church will still maintain the number of parking spaces we need because we will be attached to the housing property. There will be an easement that will allow, and this was something we had to work out with the city of Richmond, to allow for emergency vehicles. What I forgot to tell you, our church is next door to a fire station. And so we had to have a certain accommodations to meet the needs. And so we still maintain some trees. We have the playground that's included, the community space. We will also, as a church, receive a little bit of money that we can use towards building a space for us, a community space adjacent to our church. So we're excited about that. But the bigger excitement is about providing affordable housing, that we are meeting a need of the wider community. We are able to be present and answer our call for love and service to others. And that was something that we felt very important to us. That's over the years, people have said, well, nothing happened with the land. Nothing happened with the land. Nothing happened with the land. Where's the housing that was talked about in the 80s? And now we're at a point that we've been able to show some design. They've met the partners. We've met with the neighborhoods to keep them, the neighborhood association, to keep them updated. We keep the city council person that represents our area involved with what's going on, updated. Everybody is updated on every step of the process so that there are no surprises for anyone. And we're just looking forward to how we continue to build relationships and strengthen our wider community through this process. Did that cover everything, Sheila?
I think just about. Thank you. I'm going to talk very briefly, because I do want to make sure we have at least a little bit of time for Q&A, about two aspects that we've only mentioned peripherally so far. One is that, to state the obvious, everyone on this call certainly knows, and many of the speakers have mentioned in passing, affordable housing is a necessity. Everyone deserves a place to live, and there is just such a shortage of it everywhere in our country, but particularly in Virginia. A recent study from a government agency said that we had 300,000 unit shortages around Virginia, which is just crazy. So take that and add the fact that our faith calls us to care for those in need. Every faith has that same call. Every faith calls for justice. Every faith says, do unto others, has a version of the golden rule. And so it is really such a blessing to remind people of this and give folks an opportunity to stand up for that and to use resources in a way that is helpful. So I think affordable housing is a great opportunity, especially if you've got the resources. The other thing I want to touch on is the reality that not every congregation does have the resources. There are congregations operating out of storefronts or on a tiny little plot of land. that don't have any land or don't have land that's developable right now. And all of that's perfectly fine. There are a lot of other ways to support affordable housing in your community. A big one, and since I work at VICPP, I'm of course going to mention this, but a big one is advocacy. As we've talked about, there are zoning regulations, there are roadblocks in the way, and it's really, really helpful for community members to stand up and say, no, this is important to me. Just last year in the General Assembly, the VICPP had a big, was instrumental in pushing for more money for affordable housing in the budget. And in fact, we had a sign-on letter for clergy that more than 150 faith leaders signed in the course of like 3 days. We had very little notice, but we made it happen. And this year we can do even more when we work together. So doing advocacy, that can be about putting more money into the budget to build affordable housing, because the state can give tax credits, the state can give direct grants and donations to support the building of affordable housing. It can also be money to help rental assistance or first-time home buyer assistance, because heaven knows that buying a home is very, very expensive, especially for first-time home buyers who are coming from low-wealth communities. So these are great initiatives that can support. It's also really nice to do advocacy on a local level. Look into what zoning changes are being proposed in your own county, in your own city, because I have stood up at a couple of city council meetings when I lived in Charlottesville and said, yes, I think we should rezone this neighborhood to allow for an affordable housing project to be built. Like, no, it's not zoned for multifamily, but I think we should do that. And there's a lot of folks who want to maintain the character of the neighborhood in a good way. And there's a lot of people who want to maintain the character of the neighborhood in a shady way of just not wanting those kind of people living here. And so we as people of faith have to stand up and say, they're lovely people. They're already our neighbors. As Julie, you said in that video, I thought that was a beautiful line. And so that's another way for you as people of faith and as communities of faith to stand up and support affordable housing. Additionally, and we've again touched on this very briefly, there's all sorts of ways to support nonprofits in your area, whether that be the local homeless shelter or building a habitat house, or whether that be focusing on wraparound care, because housing is part of a broader network. And you know, folks who struggle with consistent housing are often struggling with healthcare, are often struggling with jobs, are often struggling with childcare. And so you can give support to agencies that do those kind of service as well. That's the lightning version of my spiel. Again, happy to talk more. This is a topic that I think we are all fairly passionate about, but I'm going to bring back our panelists and open the floor. I saw some great questions in the chat that have, many of them, been answered in the chat. But I want to just have everybody on the screen and touch on them in case you haven't been reading the chat. Does anyone have a question they'd like to verbalize before we wrap up? Okay. One question that I thought was a really good one was how did the churches who've built affordable housing overcome, there's two questions here. How did you overcome zoning issues? And how did you overcome NIMBY, the not in my backyard attitude? There are several lovely written responses in the chat, but in case folks aren't reading the chat, I want to give each of our panelists a chance to just share about that so we can all hear.
I'll go first. The zoning things, I think, is to make sure that whatever development partner you have has an amazing land use attorney who has a relationship with the supervisor or the government agency, the county, that is able to push the project along, get answers, kind of be a pest at times, but keep the relationship respectful and moving forward. And then the NIMBYism, it's really just being patient. And I don't know, Julie, what it's been like for your congregation on NIMBYism, but just reminding myself and the congregation, it's our land. It really is our land. And so we're going to listen, we're going to compromise, we're going to push back, but we're going to proceed. And then we need to line up at any county hearing, any public hearing, line up the speakers who will support your project, not just folks from your congregation, but folks from other congregations, your neighbors across the street, neighbors from other homeowners associations, and the people who may live in the facility that you're wanting to build, so they can get their story told.
Yeah, I'll follow Steve through for us, the important thing was to really understand, we've listened. It takes a lot of listening and patience to our neighbors. And also just to affirm what we believed in as really decent, affordable housing. We like green space too. We love trees too. We want a nice parking lot too. And so we could go through the list with them and agree on some things that were important to us too. And so, but it takes a lot of patience. Sometimes it takes one-to-one meetings with different individuals in addition to the large group meetings. We did, in our case, we engaged the city council person who's very supportive of affordable housing and has advocated for that, but to get them involved and ask her, who are some of the other people we need to talk to in the wider community that will stand with us? And that was important for us to do that process. So you can't rush it. You can't push it aside and ignore it. I think that's not being a good neighbor, and that's not who we are called to be as people of faith.
Amen to that. I did, so Tara put a question in the chat and had also raised her hand on screen. I wanted to mention that. Tara, would you like to say your question, or should I just read it off?
Oh, I'm happy to share my question. My question is actually just geared more towards transportation accessibility for prospective tenants, because I imagine that some locations, church and congregation locations, may not necessarily be convenient to public transportation access. And so then does that influence the decision whether to move forward? Do you get a field of dreams? If you build it, will they come? Are you taking, no pun intended, that leap of faith if the public transportation access is not already present nearby?
So I'll take a crack at that from a more technical standpoint. I think we've been fortunate in the projects that we've worked on that there has been decent public transportation access. A project in Winchester, less so we're looking at some alternatives there, but it is an important consideration for the future residents, whether it be seniors or families. They've got to have access to the services that they need. So, many locations at least have a bus line. And, one of the things that we find, and I laugh about this, and Steve will live this at the senior level, is like more of our seniors have cars now than they used to. And more of our even quite low income residents at our family properties have cars. And part of that's because, they work in that, you can call it that gig economy, right? They're the Uber drivers. They're the janitors who are working at 3 a.m. when there isn't public transportation. So more of them have cars than you might think. And for the seniors, fewer of them want to give up their cars than you might think. So it is making sure that there is access to transportation services, and also making sure that there is adequate parking, which sometimes is more parking than the local government may think you need for that population.
Thank you. I also another, oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, another good question that popped up in the chat from Bill Fogarty was to talk about the challenges of financing. I imagine that could be a 2-hour-long webinar, and we're not going to do that tonight. But, you know, and we mentioned the Virginia Housing Trust Fund, which did receive some additional funding this year. That's a great place. He suggests the Virginia Housing Development Authority. How do you pull together financing for a project like this?
Before I go there, Julie, did you have something that you wanted to add in terms of the transportation?
Actually just related, Pastor Shannon had put in a question about how each area determines what affordable housing means for that area. And so I would guess that that's set by the Commonwealth, that Virginia Housing Development Authority would set those standards of what incomes qualify. Am I correct about that?
It actually, it's partly through Virginia Housing, and it starts with the IRS, believe it or not, but then it's also guided by what the local government wants to emphasize. So there are, in terms of income qualification, there are some upper thresholds when it's committed affordable housing. So we have to get enough. This relates to the question about financing, is because we're not charging market rents. We've got to have a financing structure that allows us to maintain rents that are below market. And those rents top out normally what we call 60% of the area median income. Again, that's also another topic we don't have time for, but can go up as high as 80, but in many cases are as low as 30% of the area median income or below, because that's where there's such a great need for housing, where people really are so housing burdened. How you finance this? It is in some ways one of those houses of cards, or what's the game where you're pulling the puzzle pieces out and hoping that it doesn't collapse. So in some ways, it's just like financing your house. There's debt and equity. So the equity comes through low-income housing tax credits, and those are administered through Virginia Housing, used to be called VHDA. And the amount of credits that we get is determined by our population through this fancy formula. And then Virginia Housing administers who gets what and how it is all distributed. So that's the equity piece. And for the debt piece, there's only so much mortgage we can afford because we've got below market rents. So then it becomes all these other layers. The local governments usually contribute funds in an extremely low interest loan that is payable essentially never. The Virginia Housing Trust Fund has both state and federal money that they will then bring in to help with other additional layers of financing to close that gap between how much mortgage you can afford with the rents that you're going to pay. And then you just keep layering in sources until you get to a point that you're at break even. And that's essentially how it works at a really high level.
Thank you all so much for being on. I know we're 5 minutes past 7, and the panelists have agreed to hang out a few more minutes, but I also know that I want to respect your evenings. Any other questions before we wrap up? I'm sure we missed a few in the chat, but
there was one in the chat about how much one of these units will rent for, like at Pastor Julie's at Waypoint, or our unnamed project yet to be named. Shelley, do you want to?
Well, it's going to vary by region. So depending upon what the incomes are in the area, so it's going to be the highest in Northern Virginia, and it will be lower in other parts of the state. But based on in Northern Virginia, the area median income, meaning half make more and half make less, is more than $124,000 a year. So a market rent for a 1-bedroom is for us north of $2,500 a month and going up quickly. For an affordable, committed affordable rent, it is in that $1,300 a month range. So we start out for a 1-bedroom at about $1,000 or more below what market rents are. To folks in other parts of the state, that probably sounds breathtakingly high because it may be higher than the market rents in those communities. So again, an affordable rent will be discounted below whatever is that average market rent, depending upon what the incomes are in the area.
Yeah. Oh, and I do want to acknowledge very briefly, I see your hand up, Tara. I do want to acknowledge also that, you know, we've talked about the experience of affordable housing in mostly urban areas, but we know there is a need for affordable housing in suburban, rural areas as well. And the cost of those units might look different, and the rents on those units will look different. But I think Wesley has done a project out in Winchester as well.
Yeah,
so
it's actually just outside of Winchester. So it truly is bordering on that rural. And yes, the costs for that project are lower, and the rents are lower. So the financing challenge is really no different. One of the things that is different working in more rural markets is sometimes the intensity of the community engagement is stronger, but the process to get through all of the zoning and the approvals can be much faster. You know, when you get into the big cities, and I think Alexandria is an exception, they're reasonably nimble. Fairfax, not so much. So each community has its own personality and its own policies and procedures.
Tara, I see you took your hand down and put your question in the chat of how do housing choice vouchers factor into the financing process?
So housing choice vouchers, when we can get them, are wonderful because they allow us to underwrite, you know, to say, for instance, that we're going to charge a 60% rent, right? Which allows us to get more debt financing. But we're really only going to charge, you know, what the resident's going to pay is 30 to 35% of their income. And then the government's going to make up that difference to help make us whole. So we love housing choice vouchers. Again, they're not available in every jurisdiction. They're available through Housing Authority in Richmond. They're available fairly readily in Fairfax County, not available in Alexandria. But so Alexandria has instituted local housing grants to help make up that difference. Arlington has some of both. You know, they're not available outside of Winchester. So it's very much, again, community by community, but they are extremely valuable for providing housing for the folks who need it the most.
Well, again, I want to thank all of our panelists and all of you guys who participated, who registered. Y'all, my Midwestern roots are showing, but it's been such a lovely evening. Many blessings. Don't hesitate to reach out via email or call us at the VICPP office if you have any additional questions, and I'm happy to connect you with anybody who was speaking on the call tonight. I'll throw my contact information in the chat. Oh, Aisha did it for me. Thank you. And I also slightly earlier in the chat put in there the list if you want to make sure you're getting updates about especially housing advocacy opportunities. Make sure you're on our email list. With that, I think we will go ahead and wrap it up. Would one of the pastors be willing to send us on our way with a benediction? Julie, would you?
Sure, I'm happy to.
Thank you.
Let us pray. Gracious God, we give you thanks for this opportunity to lift our sights to what you are calling us to do and how you are using your people to be agents of transformation in our communities. We thank you for this time together and for the possibilities that are before each of us as individuals and as communities of faith, and pray that you would continue to guide us as we move forward seeking to be your servants. Amen.
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 Have a good
Thank
night,
you guys for
everybody.
sharing. All right, take care.